Mick Ronson, I remember immediately because I'm looking at it. And that's not like, I felt that immediately, those two together on stage. And to this day, really. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of performers who are incredible and magical. And you go see Iggy, a completely different animal, and that's... But this was of a unique flavour, you know. Little overtones of Mick and Keith, but not... It was prettier for a start. So I got that immediately. For somehow or other, maybe my mind was so blown open that I just, you know, was like I often think I was more like a receiver or a conduit. Intellectually, I could write about it and did, but I don't think I understood the ramifications. I mean, I don't know how anybody could have really. If anybody had, David, but Mick, as Lisa says in that interview, the first thing I remember is how straightforward the channel to Mick was. There was nothing confusing. He was, oh, hello, you know, how you doing? And that was it. If you wanted to be his friend, you could be his friend. And it wasn't going to be a demanding thing. I think that was another thing. It was a right, sit down, I'll roll up a cigarette, and, you know. It was very down home and in an English northern way. But it was totally unreal and otherworldly when it hit that stage. And there was an incredible synergy there. I think the shame of it is that it didn't go on a bit longer. And it's hard to realise that it didn't. And I think, I'm sure even David doesn't quite know why it just, but, it was magic. I mean, it was. There were quite small audiences. Starman had been released. It was released in the May. I came on. This is how fast it all happened. I came on board in the March. I remember meeting Susie within. I'd started going to those gigs within a couple of weeks. I'd met you, and you run me home with your other mate Susie, and then in May, and I know that Starman. Oh, suddenly, you know. People, David Bowie, and then Ziggy Stardust, and that picture, the very picture you're going to talk about, the one that did so much, but I'll get to the point again where David's genius lie in that. I didn't know he was going to do that. I really didn't. And I think it must have been the encore. And I think the album had just been released. So he was energised in some interesting way. And there were 1,000 people there that night. I think that was his biggest audience in London anyway, to that point in time. I remember going to see him at the Polytechnic when there were maybe 250 people once, a little bit beforehand, yeah, not that long beforehand. But Starman had obviously done something, and then he's starting to get a bit of profile, and, you know, the funny hairdo and the gaudy clothes, and this is 1972. Today, he'd be lucky to get his bottom spanked on Broadway, you know, looking like that. I mean, who would care? Back then, and then her girlfriend, Miss Ronson, you know. Was it Graham Chapman? Who was it? David was always piss his knickers about Graham Chapman from Monty Python had a big hard-on for Mick. Was always coming to the show, and Mick didn't really, he wasn't, Mick, he said, oh damn, I don't think Mick ever really understood it was even going on. That's how the truth of it was with Mick. He didn't really talk or think about it. He got in the gear, he hung out, he had a good time. There was no theory about it, he just did it. I think just when we went home to Hull, he'd have to deal, you know, the family would get a little bit of pressure. I remember Maggie saying once, hanging out with her saying that, oh no, Mick, maybe it was Mick repeating, I can't remember, whatever. Maggie said that she was getting a bit fed up with people coming up and asking if that brother of yours, Mick, is a fucking puff, you know? I mean, so that's where the ramification was. But this was also a tiny, weeny little bubble at that point in time. The glam thing hadn't, you know, later on, over the next couple of years, it became a chunkier scene. And then you've got the London, New York thing going on. But at that moment in time, it was really a little friendly, almost familial thing, wasn't it? And then, of course, there were Iggy and Lou, the acolytes. But that picture, yeah, I remember coming up to the side of stage, and I had this tiny little cheap flash on my camera. I couldn't. My wife's camera, because the only camera I'd ever been able to afford. I mean, I wasn't Mr. like super successful or well known, but I had the name and I had the moment. And I remember David coming off stage and saying, "Mick, did you get it? Did you get it?" And I'm going, "I think so." I'm not. It all happened so quickly. Now, many years later, David and I were working on this book called Moon Age Daydream together, our book. He wrote, God knows, he wrote about 15,000 words for it. And he, remember us sitting about chatting about some of the pictures, and he said to me, "You know, that wasn't what I had in mind." And I think maybe he'd actually nibbled a bit on one of Mick's guitars at maybe a gig or two earlier, but just gone over and done it. I think he did. That's what I've started to remember. But what he was really doing was trying to bite the guitar. Now, there is a shot before that I have that's in the book where you can see David standing up and Mick standing up, and David is chewing on the guitar. He said, but what happened was Mick swung his guitar down and I had to go down, and in fact, you see, he's not on his knees. If you're not on your knees, it's not really old school fellatio. His actually feet are spread like that, you see. So the biting was deliberate. The going down into a position that looked like, on the other hand, he is cradling Mick's buttocks in a particularly tender way. So you go, whatever. Perhaps he just wanted a real opportunity to squeeze his buns. Whatever the reason was, David did it, David and Mick did it, and I snapped it. And the genius of Bowie was he hustled De Vries, the then manager, to get it in the paper. He knew that it was a moment, because hadn't taken off yet, the Ziggy Stardust album. But the problem was they couldn't get it in the paper. That's how stupid Melody Maker were. Oh, I haven't got any room for that, you know. But David wasn't that well known. He was starting to get it. Where the fuck was I? Oh yeah. So David's, can we buy a page? They bought that picture into Melody Maker, and David wrote something about, you know, thanks to all you Ziggy fans. They made a postcard out of it. I have a load of them still. And that, now let's be clear, this is Melody Maker. So this is not, you know, this is not Life magazine or People. It's not that level, and it's not the internet of blanket coverage. But Melody Maker obviously got seen all over England, and it got seen in key places in America. So it's certainly in LA, San Francisco, New York, Detroit, the hip places. And I mean, I think it took me ages to understand the impact of that one thing. Now, I was just a tool. David did it. He hustled me to, I said, well, I'll let you the film, you know, no, Mick, we need it in the morning. He knew, he had it in his mind, and so I had to fucking go at midnight somewhere and process the film, and then come in with the contacts the next day. And I think I'd made a couple of prints of those two key shots, and there's no credit for me on that. You notice there isn't. No, I mean they were. Listen, you're talking about him and De Vries at that moment in time. Forget about blind ambition. That I don't think. No. That's just being cute. It was an incredibly focused attack. In any way, who the fuck was I? I didn't get paid for it, no, but you know what? David probably knew even then it was going to be worth a fortune down the road, so whatever, you know. It's, I was lucky to be there, and I'm very glad that I got that shot. And it did, it was like a key image, but you know, it's not, I can only claim a certain amount, even though I own it and control all that, and it was, you know.
So I'm going to jump another question here.
So but that's the history of that shot.
Yeah.
That's the history of that shot.
Exactly what we wanted. But then the thing I'm wondering, when it was in the paper, right? And I mean, because my mother was like,
yes,
is this who you're working for?
Yeah, it looks like
you can only imagine what Mick's mother must have gone through, right? So
yes, oh yeah, absolutely.
Did he ever say anything to you about how he felt, or did he tell David, don't do that again? Or,
no, actually, Mick wasn't really like that. I think he was a bit, I don't think he really understood what he knew well, yeah, but he wasn't, I don't think he was wired like. He didn't spend a lot of time, only because other people forced him to think it. But I don't remember him being. I've got loads of pictures after that. I've got the famous one of him straddling David, and David's down there being a big girl. And I've got a whole bunch of them. If you look in Glam, some of them are in there. And he's always fucking going down on Mick's guitar, or looking like Mick's fucking, or whatever the game was. It was great theatre, and the genius of that moment in time, and it was a very short period of time. He'd gone on the road with Ziggy and just had his hair cut maybe 2 or 3 weeks before I met him, and he just shot the album cover. People sometimes think I shot it, but I didn't. It was already shot, but it was. We all got swept up in it. I mean, my life never been quite the same again, and I don't think anybody's was. And of course, Iggy and Lou, and Lindsay Kemp as well. I mean, everybody got, and Ian Hunter as well. I mean, Mott the Hoople, that was, we all have a certain debt to that moment in time, and I think everybody made their contribution. There's no doubt that the Queen Bee was David Bowie, but there's also no doubt that that music would not have sounded like that, and I'm sure David would be happy to endorse that without what Mick Ronson did, and also the fact that Ziggy had this lieutenant who was as pretty as he was, but was the butch one, so that David could keep working that femme thing, was just brilliant theatre. People often called it theatre rock, but guess what? There was a thing on stage by 73 with a zigzag on it. And it was David changing and Mick changing costumes, and this bit of theatre that went on between them that made for incredible pictures. And that's all it was. It wasn't like Alice Cooper was doing. I remember going with David and Iggy in the summer of 72, would have been not so far after that shot was taken, summer, June or July that summer. And there's this is real theatre rock, I mean, there's a whole bloody staging performance. David doing the mime, the costume change. Mick, not as many, but he would do a costume change or two as well. So it was a brilliant thing they pulled on. I mean, absolutely brilliant. And David, bless him, is a genius, and we all love him, and we all. But that could not have happened like that without Mick, for all the reasons I've stated, And I think, God bless Mick Ronson. Now, that wasn't. Ziggy Stardust wasn't the end of. Oh yeah, I know. With it, I was trying to think with that turning. That comes from the John I'm Only Dancing stuff. I've got stuff of them. Those videos I did, and there is a you know that bloody John I'm Only Dancing video. I got Sheila had a friend who had a husband who was an assistant cameraman. Wasn't a full-fledged. He came along with a camera, 16mm. There was some wonky old record player thing there that went up and down that we put the record on, and we had they were supposed to do a sound check. We got in just before the sound check, about a bit no more than 3 hours, shot a bunch of shots, and you'll notice the camera ain't moving on any of them. It's like a bunch of stills in a way, and that was it. And then one night I edited it with this poor guy who had an epileptic fit in the morning. It's true. It's hard looking back to put it in the perspective of today, because it's such a different world today, and it was, but it was magical, and the marks are there, the Raw Power albums, the album that Mick co-produced with David Bowie, Transformer, all the young dudes, David and Mick, they put that together. Lindsay Kemp, bringing Lindsay out of, to what later became considerable fame. And up until that, he was an underground character. And little old me, I mean, I'm only a photographer. Photographers aren't such a big deal back then. No one's going to be interviewing the photographer. Because what he's got to say is even less interesting than what musicians have to say. And it's still true today. So I don't know why the fuck they've embraced photographers as well, but there's too much bloody TV time out there and media time. They've got to fill it up with something. Anyway, but Mick Ronson was a darling. But I worked with Mick I remember shooting him in New York, him and Ian in New York, in both the late 70s and the late 80s, doing a session over at the house in off Hyde Park. All those ones fucking looks beautiful on the bed. I mean, they were almost too much when I shot them, but today they're fantastic. And quite a lot of different ones I did. Mick was, how can I put it? In a way, he was, unless it was directly related to music or just hanging about being cool with people, he wasn't, his curiosity, yeah, he had a masculine curiosity. It's not to say that Mick Ronson was a saint in the naughtiness of the world. He was a saint in the way he dealt with people. But you know, Mick had I remember Mick going into the toilet on a couple of occasions and looking, you know what I mean? I mean, those were the days. It's not, no one's, you know, we all, even if we were married, there's going to be a bit of dabbling going on, wasn't there? And nobody really, you know, it also went pre-AIDS by a long way, and also things were happening very fast. So that passed and whatever, and that was just the way it was. But Mick is like, you know, he's all bound up in my myth as well, you see, because without the fire of that moment in time, which, you know, Iggy, Lou, Lindsay Kemp, Mott, and then off down the road, Roxy Music, Queen, and then whatever, that came out of that moment for me because I was the big queer rock photographer, you know. If you want to look, I mean, Queen came to me, and I said, they just wanted to look like a big bunch of schoolgirls, because that was the vibe of the day that, like, Mick and David had put out there. And that's what they wanted, you know, and I did it. You can see the picture of them topless, and they go, oh, fucking give us a kiss, you know. But, so that all came out of that, and then Rocky Horror, so many things that turned out to be really quite significant as the years rolled on. Came out of that moment for me as well. So,
what about the New York thing? What about hitting New York?
Well, New York started in '72. That's when we all got a taste of it. Came over for that Ziggy thing, and there was some connection with the Warhol people, and of course Lou was there, and so there was a lot of what's her name?
Cherry.
Oh, Cherry, of course, but Surinder in a way. Probably, and I could get into trouble. I could have Angela Bowie stalking me because of it, but and maybe they were the joint pair. Maybe there was the London and the New York. Let's fucking get this straight. The London and New York versions of it. But for London it was Angie, and New York there was Surinder, and that vibe around it. They were really the female faces of it, and of course Surinder, Jeannie, give us a kiss. That video. There was a phone call. Fucking, I'd never been to San Francisco before, but Cherry Vanilla knew of, she must have known Jerry Slick, who was the cameraman on the studio stuff for Jeannie. And it was only a couple of days before we called up, set it up, did the shoot in the studio, which that fucking stuff is great. And again, I don't think there's any cameras, like there, but it's fantastic stuff, you know. Living on Snow White, you know, there's a go. I've got handwritten lyrics of that by David. And probably better if I put them on eBay. I can fucking have a nice holiday at Butlins on that, you know. But that, I wouldn't, you know what, that'll never happen. One day when we're all dead and buried, Natalie can sell them, and that's fine.
But the New York thing was...
New York was important. It injected that other dimension, and the Bowie and the Iggy and the Lou Reed connection, the vibe of it all mixing up, and the Warhol thing. You know, there was all this inputting into it, which did make it was kind of a weird feeling, weird in a sexy way, if you like. But it was weird because, I mean, one because we were all very young and didn't know what the fuck we were doing, and it was breaking ground, and it was almost sort of organic. I think David was the most aware. I had a certain awareness, but it was a little bit more academic-y. One, because I was part of it, but I was also the observer. And two, because I've been to bloody Cambridge and studied all this, spent all that, all that clever stuff. So, but I came at it very viscerally, which that picture is a pure visceral shot. That's not about aesthetic lighting, I got the motherfucking shot. And there's nothing clever about that photograph other than what's going on in the motherfucking frame and the expressions on the kids in the front row, and you realise how small that audience is. And you know what? Through most of the gigs of Ziggy Stardust, the audience were up against the stage. There was a couple of bigger ones here and there where they weren't. That's why come 73, I've got so many images. But you could see from the beginning, even Mick getting grabbed in some of that very early footage I shot. So there was something, it was a fascinating thing. Now, even more fascinating, now I look back, and I think we all tried to run away from it in a way for a long time, because it was everybody's calling card, I mean, if you wanted to go out and be wicked, you don't have to David Bowie. Well, maybe not in Nevada, but because the word hadn't reached, but in London or New York or LA or where any of us wanted to be, come on over and get naughty with us, And that applied to all of us, really, except for maybe Woody and Trevor. I mean, I don't know what the fuck they did, but the rest of us had a jolly good time.
Did you hang out much with Mick?
Yeah, I hung out.
Because I know you came to our apartment a few times.
Yeah, no, I did, and I would hang out. I got pictures of him after gigs. I've got pictures. I hung out. If you check out all the pictures I've got these great pictures of David groping Mick. I've often thought about publishing, and then I thought, nah. But David is, because, the Annie Leibovitz was the picture of Rolling Stone, and the photo editor of Rolling Stone at the time, that cover of mine was, but she saw the contact, and David's only in his little jockey shorts with his cheeks showing, and he's Mick's getting made up, and David's reaching over, and this completely British schoolboy daffy look on his face, except for it's David Bowie looking like he's, like it's a big gay moment. But the great thing is it kind of sums it up, because you can see that Mick he's just kind of getting on with whatever the fuck he's doing, whatever David's up to, and the performance, Mick's, getting on with getting his hair stuff. And there's about half a dozen of those frames, and I'll cost you. No, I've never published them. I mean, I don't know why, because they're so harmless. They really are. I mean, it's just David goofing off is all he's doing. But he's fucking in his little jock strap and Mick. But Mick is the funny part. David like that, and Mick is, you can see he's just getting on with it. And that kind of summed up his whole attitude towards it. I never really heard him complain about it. He just got on with things. Right? I mean, I don't. You know him better than anybody, but I think all this is. I don't think Mick was radically different. He wasn't somebody who. A lot of us could change a little bit here. Or Mick was really Mick. He was really. There was an innocence to him. Well, he wasn't innocent exactly in that other way, because none of us were, but he wasn't innocent.
I think he also appreciated what entertaining was. I mean, he definitely
exactly. Well, that's why he never. People say, well, Mick Ronson wasn't a big puff. Why did he say no? But he understood. David. And he understood it was for entertainment, and that was it. Now, the implications of it all were more than just entertainment.
Sorry.
That all fed into the ongoing vibe of the time, But the reality was, David wanted to attract some attention, and Mick went along with all of it. I think Mick just really liked playing with David. I think and it wasn't like he looked like a prat. I think he understood that he looked good, tarted up like that. He knew he looked like a big fucking queer tart, and he wasn't. But, you know, it's showbiz. He's gives him a chance to go out and do what he loves best of all, play the guitar. Like he's become, over the period of time, even more so since his death, he's been recognised as one of the masters. There's no doubt about it. When you gather his body of work together, he ranks up there. He ranks up there with, you know, Johnny Marr. They rank up there with, I don't know, if you want to argue Eric and Hendrix and as being an order of their own, then fair enough. But then Mick's right up there. He's really totally innovative, and yet there was a classic vibe to what he did. Do you understand what I mean? He did it his way, but it had a pure classic. And of course, he was musically trained. He knew what the fuck he was doing with music, didn't he? He was not and could play just about anything, and did. So he was, as a musician, something of a prodigy anyway. So that major thing he brought to the table. And for David, who was all kinds of things, you know, including a musician, but he had many. David was a visionary, I think, and I think you have to give him, you know. Or I look, and every time I come back there, I go, and we're all grateful, including Mick, including Susie, you know. Mr. Bowie, what a fucking caper! But it was as a photographer, those two together. It's like great stuff. I mean, that's in the museums now. That shot will be probably about 14 foot high in Tokyo Metropolitan Museum of Photography. It's this moment, this funny little flash moment, and
that was the thing.
It did help, Dave. I realise now. I go, well, I just took the picture. You know, I didn't set it up. Wasn't in it. I didn't manipulate and get it out. I took the fucking book and gave the print over, and yet, without me being there, there were no other photographers. And of course, none of them have been allowed up on the side of the stage anyway, because De Vries was in controlling mood when there were about 4 people in the audience. So he saw the controlling vision, you know, from the get-go. But it was just really, it was the stuff of fairy tales. And Mick was one of the princesses at the centre of it, both musically or both sonically and visually. But I think the other thing with Mick and David, is different as they were, they really liked each other a lot. I think they really. I have that very famous picture it's become now, that of the two of them having, and of course at the time it just never got. I don't know if I've got it here. It never got published at the time because the fuck are you going to do with it in the music press? But I hope I've got it. I may not. Somebody may have lusted after it, and I may have given it to them. Yeah, it's the one of. Oh, I mean, look at it. Look at the two of them. It's so kind of. There's that little look between them, and they've got pats of butter and peas and probably like boiled potatoes, and it's a British Rail lunch, and it's 1973, and they look like they've just fucking landed. Look at the state of those two. But they also look like they really like. There's a lot of this sweet conspiratorial thing. Believe you me, this is actually more popular as a seller than the guitar Falacia. One, because I think how ridiculous they look. I mean, this could have been shot yesterday. It would still look pretty surreal. And then the British Rail lunch. So, but I think it's also the sweetness of. What do you think, Mick? Oh, I think we're doing all right, Dave. Yeah. What time are we going to get there?
Yeah, it does look like that.
You can see it was a genuine, and it was a genuine friendship. There was never. I don't know why they didn't ever work together again. It's just because it's the way these things happen. But it was never because there was. Mick and David always loved each other, didn't they? Even when they didn't see each other. Because remember, after all, when David got rolling, you know, I mean, you're talking about he was off to the races. And he was very ambitious, and he was always ambitious. You see stuff he was doing back in the 60s and how, I mean, he was a man fueled with I think a certain kind of ambition. He did want to be, and that's another interesting point. It'll refer back to Mick. He did want to be famous. I mean, wealthy, but I don't think he thought about the money as long as it was there. That's simply a buy. He wanted to be famous. That's for sure. But he wanted to be famous in a particular way. He wanted to be famous in his own way. He wanted to be famous in a unique way. And it all happened like that. There was nothing stereotypical about what they were doing. They were laying down a new cipher. Those albums, embracing Transformer, the influence of that set of albums where Mick may not have been the producer, but he was the arranger and was whatever. I wasn't there other than Transformer recording, so I don't know what, but I know, yes I was, out in at the pin-up stuff. But it was a unique thing, and the music still sounds incredible today. You know, you listen to Ziggy Stardust, you listen to Hunky Dory, even listen to Lad Insane, listen to pin-ups. I mean, it doesn't matter what you listen to, the work holds up. I mean, think all the records that are put out every single week. There's only a certain number that stay the course, but that entire body, and it sort of started. Was Mick on The Man Who Sold the World? Yeah, he was. So the germs of it are all there, aren't there? That was the first time. He wasn't on, or was he on Man of Words, Man of Music, Space Oddity? No, he wasn't. He came in there, and that was laid the groundwork for Hunky Dory, which laid the groundwork for Ziggy Stardust. And then, you know, it's fucking knickers off, girls, here we go, you know. And, but I can't, there's nothing I could say. We all got a bit taken advantage of back then by, you know, certain parties, but, you know, I don't feel any rancour because I might not got it when I got paid for anything then, but I got the fucking stash, which was really all I wanted anyway. And so it turned out to be this valuable because of these great, incredible, photogenic, sonically brilliant artists, and you know, I have this swag now that has matured over the years, and you know what, I just wanted to do it anyway. I just wanted to be there. I got a smell of that, and it smelled what it smelled like. I'd only had that smell once before, and that was the first time I saw Pink Floyd with Syd Barrett, and that was a few years before, when I was in my first year at Cambridge, the Christmas of '66. So that was about 5.5 years, and I wasn't taking pictures then, but of something unprecedented, something new, something different. Of course, later I got to know Syd, and then I finally picked up a camera and actually did a bunch of work with him before he disappeared into the netherworld. But David was always interested in Syd too. That was part of all that link. Anyway, it's hard, even though I did spend time with Mick outside of this, and did spend time with Mick and Ian, God bless him, and I also shot the pictures for We Aorta, which is the only official Hunter Ronson album, albeit that there really were some before that, but that one was actually dubbed Hunter Ronson, wasn't it? So, but Mick, from the minute I met him, I regarded him as a friend. I mean, he was not someone who would betray your trust, or whose trust you'd ever betray. It was didn't really have to. I think we don't have to talk about it anymore than that. Yeah, I think an interesting point you make there was a sexuality in the music. Certainly there was a sexuality in David's attitude. Certainly there was a sexuality in what happened between David and Mick. And even though it was a puffy thing, it turned the girls on enormously. I mean, they do their act together off stage, you know, rip their fucking knickers off. Everybody, all the girls loved it, you know. And there were fellas that liked it too, as it so happened.
Well, it was, you know, the whole...
It worked that, because it was a coming out of the closet. I tried to explain to people, say, well, you know what? It wasn't that it wasn't all queer sex in that glam scene at all. It was the multi-sexuality. It was not... It was as straight as it was gay, or as it was bi. You know, there's a certain amount of bi going on, dabbling this way and that way just to check it out, you know. Oh well, no. You can remember, I wasn't a completely unconscious person. I had been a hippie student. I had read all the books. I was, throw a birdie. I mean, that was part of the attraction. Was it was going to upset some people. Yes, upsetting the status quo, and that was a very British thing. The hippies first got my hair long, and I'm seeing David talking about that on television too, about getting wolf whistled by truck drivers. So there was, yes, that was a revolution, and it was a cultural revolution. It was all mixed in with the gay thing, obviously, and it was about as cutting edge as anything ever was, and it was pretty as fucking shit. It was the prettiest thing. Who was the prettiest star? La 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 la. I always think David was the prettiest star. I don't care who's come down the fucking pipe. He was the fucking prettiest. So it wasn't as pretty as David. No. Once David blew up, I've got to tell you, and I know Roland, and I've shot him, and bless him. Most people I know weren't so enamoured of Mark. He was tending to get a bit lumped over with Sweet and Slade as being the fact that we were wrong. Let's give credit as well. But at the time, Get It On, I fucking wants to listen to. I could be listening to Waiting for My Man, or Moon Age Daydream, or much hipper stuff. But Mark was. Yeah, but nobody I knew was at least a bit interested. None of the girls, boys, or anything. David Bowie, however, and then that fucking guitar player. They were the prettiest stars. But looking back now, I go, it was a good time. It was an interesting time. It was a good time to be young, and it was a good time in the culture where. It was a dangerous time because the doors had been opened to all this, sex, drugs and rock and roll stuff. So that's because, and the hippie thing had done that. And those naughty Rolling Stones, that naughty Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and Brian Jones. So that vibe had been thrown out there. But this was kinkier. This definitely had a kinky. This was going in the direction of now, not like okay, free sex. This was going in. This did lead us all, I suspect, into strange places at times. You wake up in the morning, and it was this vibe that was being exuded by this thing in there that all revolve around David Bowie, and it did embrace a bit of Iggy Pop and some Lou Reed, and right in the middle of it all was Miss Ronson, who was like an innocent, really, but not an innocent necessarily in in the shagging sense. It's just slipped out, Mother. I'm sorry about that. I want to see this footage.
You would, don't worry, sweetie. I wouldn't. No, darling.
But nobody kind of minded. I mean, I had a beautiful young wife, Sheila, as well, and it was all,
But there was no AIDS, was there?
No, it was just nice. It was a bit saucy, and a bit.
This is what I'm saying. It's spilled down into, the teenagers. I'm sorry. It was just.
Don't fucking be blaming us, but it was the thing as I got involved with the punk stuff too, and as did loads. I mean, I was the king of the glam rock photographers, but that was kind of a smaller movement in a way, and it was really about London, New York, LA. The ramifications have been massive, and including into the punk thing. Without that, no punk. Without the fucking dyed hair, no Johnny Rotten dyed hair. Ziggy Stardust with a very bad attitude. I think David, that's what I was said in an interview. David said Ziggy Stardust had a bastard mutant son, and his name was Johnny Rotten. So, and I tell you an interesting thing, that I sell limited edition art prints, signed, numbered, nowadays. Now, I've sold a lot of David Bowie. I've sold that one of the two of them together, people love. Haven't sold many of Mick on his own, but I have here and there. But Steve Jones, was given a present of a Ziggy Stardust shot by, what's her name, Ramone, Johnny Ramone's wife, who's still alive and involved with the estate. When I had a show in LA, a little while later, she bought him a Mick Ronson solo shot. And when I say, I'm talking about the Ziggy period. And then he himself came to me after that, and God bless him, he's the only person who's ever bought solo Woody shots and solo Trevor Boulder shots off me. And this is Steve Jones. Steve Jones, I know that it's Johnny this and later on Sid that, but Steve Jones was the one who told Russell Harty to fuck off and got him on the front pages, and that's a fact. Jones's Jukebox, fantastic. He told me he knew 2 chords when they started out. I said, oh, Mick Ronson. I remember saying to me, I never thought I could play. He said, I still can't. I mean, I could play 2 fucking chords. But he was a big fan of the Spiders. The Spiders, because they had the vibe had a revolutionary spirit about it. And it didn't stay around long enough to get stale. It kind of zipped off real fast. You're talking the hairdo. You're only talking about, see, that begins in probably February 72, it really kicks. The album is getting ready for release in June. That's been done. Brian Ward has done the cover pictures. David gathering in the influences, you know, the Beethoven, Clockwork Orange intro, the space thing. I mean, he's weaving the threads together, but he's doing it day by day, by experiment. I think he had a certain vision, but he built it day by day. But he could not have done it without Mick, both musically and theatrically. And he was lucky to have someone like me along to record it, because there was no one else around. Now, people often say to me, well, how come you got all the best pictures of that era? Do you remember? Yes, but some of the shows, by the time David got famous, a lot of photographers did want to take pictures, and here and there, including Terry O'Neill, got some snaps. But nobody, and obviously performance shots, every so often someone would sneak in, but you know, most of the famous stuff of that period, not the studio stuff, done in Japan by, what's his name? I met the guy. We did an interview together. I can't remember his bloody name, but he did those great kind of cosmic kabuki-ish looking outfits. But just about, and not the Brian Ward ones, which were shot before I showed up for that album cover. But all the rest. And certainly all the sexiest pictures of him and Mick together. All those guitar chomping ones. Or that, do you know that colour one where Mick's straddling David and he's fucking, yeah, can bend over baby, you know.
We've got some great footage actually of the 1980 floor show, which he does. Mick really goes on the offensive.
Oh, I've got some incredible. You're right. The interaction between them. It wasn't those 2 moves because it was a small stage. But I have loads of them. You know, synergized. Yeah, sometimes I forget about that because that one doesn't get. Those pictures don't get published as much. But that was actually the wildest manifestation of Ziggy. But it was shot. I think it was the October of September, October. I can't remember. Of 73, and that was actually the last Ziggy performance. And of course there was the Pin-Ups album that I went down and shot, must have been in the August. You were there. I got pictures of you and me and you and David. I think probably you and Mick. So it felt probably like quite a long thing, because when you're young, sometimes, and there was so much going on and it was all so new for all of us. I think that's another thing. It was new for everybody, and the vibe, you know, it was so racy. You know what I mean? Oh dear, if any of us didn't know how to be really naughty before that, we certainly. I'm not looking at you, Susie. You were a young lady of good upbringing, but nevertheless, there weren't so many girls regular. I mean, there were girls in and out all the time, but there weren't that many regular inside girls, were there? Remember young Gloria was around for a while, but then Angie got rid of her and got Coco in. You know, the fatal move in a way.
The fatal move.
Yeah, because David, I think, and again, this is not for... No, needed a strong woman around, but he needed someone who was Angie was at her best when I first met them.
Exactly.
When she was
It had
totally
to be.
committed
Had
to
to be.
helping David. Exact. But once it got to, it all started to change on that American tour, where she kind of started to get in the way, and it started to be embarrassing. You know, she hung about and she was still around, of course, but she didn't. She of course didn't help that. I mean, David encouraged the idea of her being a star, I think, because give her something to do, you know, Jip Jones and DeFries. Well, he was going to be an impresario, wasn't he? Mick was one, and Jip Jones and Amanda Lear, and he did have a vision, but he, and, you know, after that, Amanda did go off and make a bunch of money as a disco queen in
Germany, right?
In Germany, exactly. And Lindsay Kemp blew up. I mean, we all, you know, Mick Rock, fucking who the fuck is that big
Susie
guy?
Ransom.
Exactly.
We all had a moment in the sun there.
So what about that? Sorry, but what the vibe? What was the vibe like when it was? You knew it was all over when you were doing the Pin-Ups album. Maybe could you tell?
No, I didn't know that anything. Again, I don't think one. And it wasn't over with Pin-Ups. I mean, that Pin-Ups was. But it wasn't. It was really over after the. But by then, I was so caught up in my own things. By the time of that, I had probably had my first meeting with Queen, and we were because I think that was around the October. And then I did some pictures of November, December Queen. So I was like, you know, and I'm here, I've arrived without quite knowing it, because it's not like I'm making that much money, but I'm making more than I was a couple of years ago. And,
you had a high profile then, didn't you?
well, relative to the times, I mean, no one had. David got a high profile relative. None of us had huge there wasn't as much media. But I had a profile, as rock and roll photographers go, considering there were a bunch who've been around a lot longer than me. I certainly got, you know, a little thing, and I was getting work based on, you know, it was David Bowie's photographer. I mean, I was David. That was partly why I stayed away from David for many years, you know, because I didn't. That was a trap. I mean, it wasn't David's fault, bless him. He cast a long shadow, and I think Mick also, you know, had to go through that, because it became such a, not just creatively, but culturally, that shadow, or whatever, the light, or whatever it was a strong one that beamed out of that moment. And it did, and it was a rich thing, and it did include Iggy and Lou straying. It was very sexy, you know. And that was sort of the most, that and the creativity and the travelling around. That was really what it was all about.